At 2:11 a.m., you sit inside the car you wanted for 11 years, writing an advertisement to sell it, unable to press publish. The engine is perfect, the leather still smells expensive, and you still look back at the car after parking, which makes the decision feel almost like betrayal. So this is not the story of someone who bought the wrong car. It is the story of someone who bought the right car at the wrong moment, before life showed you the difference. 6 months earlier, your father asked for one thing, and you answered with 3 harmless words, maybe next year. Yesterday, you finally discovered what those 3 words had cost, and the answer had nothing to do with horsepower. The dream began when you were 17, carrying dirty glasses across a restaurant parking lot after the dinner rush. A silver performance coupe turned through the entrance, quiet enough to seem confident rather than desperate for attention. You stopped beside the service cart because the car looked exactly like the life you hoped adulthood would eventually become, polished, quiet, and completely beyond your reach. The driver stepped out wearing an ordinary jacket and handed the valet his key without checking the menu prices. You watched him disappear through the doors as though he naturally belonged everywhere he decided to enter, without glancing back once. For several seconds, you forgot the cold, the wet plates, and the bus waiting after your shift. You knew nothing about depreciation, interest, or the difference between wanting something and wanting what it represented, because nobody teaches those differences at 17. You only understood that the driver looked free, and the car seemed to be proof that he had become free, at least from where you were standing. That night, you searched the model on an old laptop while everyone else in the apartment slept. Even used examples cost more than your father earned in a year, but you saved the photograph anyway, even though saving it changed nothing practical. You selected silver paint, dark wheels, and black leather as though choosing details could make the future arrive sooner. The photograph survived graduation, your first full-time job, 3 cracked screens, and several years of impossible prices, remaining untouched while almost everything else changed. During those years, your family drove a faded sedan your father kept alive with patience and driveway repairs. The air conditioner only worked while moving, and the passenger window rattled whenever the road became rough. Your father loved the sedan because it started every morning, but you resented how clearly it announced what your family could not afford. While teaching you to change the oil, your father noticed your embarrassment and quietly returned to the repair without challenging it. He only said a reliable car matters because it keeps your life moving when everything else becomes difficult. You nodded, wiped the oil from your hands, and reopened the silver coupe photograph before entering the house. In your imagination, the car erased every office, restaurant, and conversation where you had ever felt smaller than everyone else. The dream carried you through rejected applications, weekend shifts, low salaries, and meetings where louder people received credit for your work. Every raise brought the coupe closer, but rent, family expenses, and ordinary emergencies repeatedly pushed it back. During those years, your father often unfolded a coastal map and described 3 towns from the life he had before you were born. He wanted to revisit an old motel, a former workplace, and a diner he claimed still served perfect pancakes. You promised the trip would happen once you owned a better car and had enough vacation time to enjoy it properly. Your father said the faded sedan could leave tomorrow, but you insisted some journeys deserved a better car. Neither of you understood how long that harmless sentence would wait beneath everything that followed. At 28, you received the promotion you had chased for 4 years on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Your manager explained the responsibilities, but your attention remained fixed on the salary printed near the bottom. For the first time, the dream car was no longer impossible. It was simply expensive, and expensive felt dangerously close to possible. Your co-workers celebrated the promotion and asked when you would finally replace the aging hatchback in the parking lot. That evening, you found the exact silver coupe, with the same wheels and black interior selected 11 years earlier. The price was $61,800, frightening enough to pause you but no longer large enough to end the conversation. You stretched the loan from 5 years to 6 and promised future raises would make the payment easier. The payment became $926, while insurance and ownership costs stayed separated so the full total never appeared. The $8,000 down payment would nearly empty your emergency fund, but waiting suddenly felt harder than losing the safety. The dealership said another buyer was interested, turning 11 years of patience into a decision you felt had to happen today. Before leaving, you sent the listing to your father and asked whether he remembered the car. He replied with your old restaurant photograph and 3 words that made turning back feel impossible. I remember everything. The dealership smelled like coffee, polished leather, and a place where hesitation had been carefully removed. The silver coupe waited beneath the lights with every detail matching the photograph saved when you were 17. When the salesman asked how long you had wanted it, your answer made his sales pitch unnecessary. Sitting behind the wheel felt less like entering a car and more like finally meeting a life you had rehearsed. The engine started, and for several seconds every calculation you had made became quieter than the sound. During the test drive, even the ordinary highway felt like somewhere you had worked years to reach. The salesman offered you one night to think, but you said you had already been thinking for 11 years. Inside the finance office, the dream became signatures, add-ons, and a final payment slightly higher than expected. You noticed the increase, but stopping now felt more painful than paying it for the next 6 years. When the key entered your hand, it felt like proof that the difficult years had finally produced something visible. The photograph beside the car captured the happiest version of you anyone had seen in years. Your father answered the photograph immediately and told you to come before the daylight disappeared. The first drive felt exactly as good as you had imagined, which made every sacrifice seem temporarily reasonable. You took the longer road to your father's house because arriving meant ending the moment you had waited for. Your father was waiting beside the faded sedan, smiling before the coupe had completely stopped. He circled the car, praised the silver paint, and reminded you that the coastal trip could finally happen. You offered your father the driver's seat, but he chose the passenger side because he was afraid of damaging anything. For nearly an hour, the car felt less like a symbol of success and more like something the two of you had earned together. Your father unfolded the coastal map and said spring would be perfect, and you promised to keep the week open. For the first several weeks, the car delivered enough happiness to make every warning about money feel exaggerated. Co-workers gathered around it, friends asked for photographs, and strangers occasionally looked over at traffic lights. You photographed it beneath city lights and cleaned the wheels every weekend as though preserving the feeling depended on preserving the car. The first payment left on payday, and the excitement was still strong enough to make $926 feel reasonable. Evening drives with your father continued, and every story made the promised road trip feel closer. Spring became summer when one major project at work refused to finish on time. Summer became autumn when a coworker left and everyone remaining inherited part of his workload. Autumn became winter when the insurance renewal arrived much higher than the amount used in your original calculation. By the fourth month, the car still looked beautiful, but it no longer changed how an ordinary Tuesday morning felt. Co-workers stopped gathering, friends stopped asking for pictures, and the key became another object collected before work. Insurance, fuel, parking, and maintenance gradually formed a second payment you had never agreed to see as one number. A small scratch beside the rear wheel produced a $900 estimate and 3 evenings of frustration. You left the damage unrepaired because the down payment had already weakened the emergency fund meant for problems like this. You declined a weekend away with friends because the hotel, food, and extra fuel felt irresponsible that month. You ignored a more interesting job because it paid slightly less, even though the current one was exhausting you. You were finally driving the car you wanted, but the life required to keep it had become harder to change. Then your father called with the trip fully planned and asked whether you could finally give him 2 weeks. Your father had chosen the dates, marked the hotels, and even checked which roadside diner was still open. You told him the plan sounded perfect, then opened your banking app before answering the question he had actually asked. The trip was possible, but only if the next month contained no repair, medical bill, or unexpected expense. The car payment, insurance, fuel, and registration had already claimed money that once existed for unplanned decisions. You could use the emergency fund, but after the down payment and scratch estimate, that money no longer felt available. You also knew that leaving work for 2 weeks would place the unfinished project on someone else's desk. None of these reasons made the trip impossible, but together they made saying yes feel irresponsible. So you said the easiest sentence available, maybe next year, when work settles down. Your father stayed quiet for a moment, then said next year might have better weather anyway. He did not argue, which made the decision feel reasonable instead of final. After the call, you started the engine and felt relieved because the difficult decision had been postponed. For several days, you treated that relief as evidence that you had made the responsible choice. Your father stopped mentioning the trip, and you assumed that meant he had accepted the delay. 3 months later, your mother called during work and said your father had become dizzy while walking outside. You drove to the hospital faster than necessary, discovering how little the engine mattered when the destination frightened you. Your father was awake and joking when you arrived, which briefly made the entire day feel smaller. The doctor explained that the episode was manageable, but long travel should wait until his condition became more stable. Your father said they could take the trip later, but neither of you used the words, next year. On the drive home, the coastal route remained saved on your phone, but the original journey no longer existed. That was when you understood the car had not taken the trip, but the life built around keeping it had helped you postpone it. You had always measured affordability by whether the payment cleared, never by the choices that disappeared afterward. The coupe had not ruined your life, it had simply made every unexpected decision slightly harder to say yes to. That night, you returned to the parking lot, opened a sales website, and began writing the advertisement from the opening. You described the condition, mileage, service history, and features without mentioning what the car had come to mean. Your thumb hovered above publish because selling it felt like disappointing the 17-year-old who had survived by imagining this moment. Then you looked at the empty passenger seat, remembered the hospital, and pressed the button. By morning, strangers were asking whether the price was negotiable, as though 11 years could be reduced through one message. The strongest offer was thousands below what you still owed, meaning freedom would require paying for a car you no longer owned. For several days, that loss became an excuse to keep everything exactly as it was. But keeping the car to avoid admitting a loss only guaranteed that the loss would continue arriving monthly. You accepted the offer, transferred money from savings, and scheduled the handover for Saturday morning. On Friday night, you washed the coupe more carefully than you had in months. You cleaned the dashboard, removed old receipts, and found the coastal map beneath the passenger seat. The paper still carried your father's handwritten dates from the trip that never happened. You folded the map into your jacket instead of placing it back inside the car. The buyer arrived with the same expression you had worn at the dealership, making the goodbye unexpectedly difficult. You explained the controls, mentioned the small scratch, and handed over the service records before surrendering the key. For 1 second, the key rested between the life you had imagined and the life you were choosing now. The coupe disappeared down the street, and the driveway looked strangely larger after it was gone. You expected regret, but what arrived first was silence, followed by the unfamiliar feeling that next month belonged to you again. 2 weeks later, you bought a modest used sedan with enough cash left over to rebuild the emergency fund. The new car attracted no attention, but it started every morning and asked very little from the rest of your life. When payday arrived without the old payment, the empty space in your budget felt more valuable than the coupe had looked. You stopped feeling wealthy for strangers and started feeling prepared for people who actually knew your name. Your father's condition improved slowly, though the doctor still recommended shorter journeys and frequent stops. The original 2-week route was impossible, so you divided it into 3 small trips that could happen now. On the first Saturday, your father entered the modest sedan without worrying about scratching the door. The seats were ordinary, the engine was quiet, and neither of those things mattered once the city disappeared behind you. Your father told the same stories again, but this time you listened without checking the clock or calculating the cost. The old motel had been repainted, and the factory where he once worked had become a storage warehouse. The diner was closed, with a faded sign hanging where your father had promised perfect pancakes. Your father laughed and admitted the pancakes were probably never as good as he remembered. You understood he was not punishing you for the lost trip. He was giving you permission to stop mourning it. The journey had changed, but it had not disappeared completely, and that difference was enough. The coupe had performed exactly as promised. The mistake was expecting it to provide confidence, freedom, and proof forever. You had asked whether your salary could afford the payment, but never what the payment might prevent later. Before buying your dream car, ask whether it leaves room for the future you cannot predict. A beautiful car can wait, but the people and moments your freedom was meant to protect often cannot.